What's up, everybody? Welcome on to Bible Basics Bible Study. We are back at it. I see you guys trickling on in. As you come in, make sure you swipe to the right, share to all your friends and your followers, and also let everybody know we are back in Bible Study, Bible Basics. We're kicking back off with our third module. Glad to see you guys joining in. Of course, when you come in, make sure you type in your name. Let me know where you're watching from. If you're a member of New Psalmist, of course, let me know that. If you go to another church, let me know that as well. Give you a shout out to your pastor, to your church. We want to make sure we let everybody know who's in the room with us today for our Bible Basics Bible Study. I'm excited to get back at it. We've had a couple of months off, but we are back in full swing. Hey, Walter, my brother, Reverend Walter Thomas Jr., pastor of the First Baptist Church of Steelton, Pennsylvania, is in with us today. So glad all of you guys are on. I'm sharing it right now on all of my accounts. Let the world know we are in Bible Basics today. Hey, Casey, hope all is well. Jasmine, glad to see you. Let me know what church you guys are watching from. If you're a member of New Psalmist, give us a MPBC shout out. If you go to another church, we'll shout you guys out as well. But we're going to have a good time. I'm trying to share it on my other device, but it doesn't want to work. But we're going to have a good time on here in Bible Basics Bible Study. For those of you who may not know, I'm Reverend Joshua Thomas, the Director of Media, as well as the leader of the Millennial Ministry at the New Psalmist Baptist Church, where Bishop Walter Scott Thomas Sr. is the fine pastor, as we used to say back in the old days of the church. But this is our Bible Basics Bible Study. We are going through the entire Bible. We've started off in the book of Genesis and traveling right on through. We had to take a little break, as some of you know, back in exactly 2 months ago today. Wow, yeah, today's the 27th. Happy Wednesday. Yes, exactly 2 months ago today, I was ordained at New Psalmist. So, we had to take a little break, had to get my mind together because I had to go in front of the ordination council. And for those of you who don't know, the process of ordination in the Baptist church, especially at New Psalmist, and the way we do it in the churches that really partner with us, we go through a council and you must prepare. You have to write a paper on what you believe about your faith. I had 10 questions I had to answer in written form, but also you must prepare other sub-questions. And when you go before the council of ordained elders, they can ask you any and everything. So you can imagine it is a nerve-wracking experience. I went into the council all by myself. I had no one else there with me, no one to my left, no one to my right. So every question that was asked in my council, it was directed at me, and I had to give an answer for it. It was an interesting day. The power actually was out at New Psalmist. I was sitting in my office studying, going through my notes, and the power went out, complete blackness. We had to move the council to a different room, moved it to the rehearsal hall. So I walk into the rehearsal hall, and all the ordained elders and ministers and reverends and pastors are up on the risers in the rehearsal hall, like Walter said, with no air. And I walk in there, and they're all looking down on me like they're about to throw stones. So the first question, I couldn't get myself together. I was stumbling over easy stuff, assurances that I've known for years. I couldn't even get it out. And then after the first question, I remember taking a deep breath, saying, let's do this. And then we went on through, and God bless, made it through the council, was ordained to the gospel ministry. So some of you who may have been following before and wondering why the name looks different is because I went from a minister to now an ordained reverend. So that's why it's Rev J. Thomas now, not just M-I-N J. Thomas. Had some elevation. Somebody praise God for elevation. Send some hearts up for elevation. I want to see some hearts on elevation. You got to believe that. So we got some elevation, but now excited to be operating in this new level of ministry and to be back with you guys on Periscope. If you are blessed and you enjoy these Periscope Bible studies, just send up the hearts. I want to make sure that these Bible studies are blessing you and everybody who's watching in with us, to make sure we are doing what you guys are looking for. One of the things we found is that so many people want to learn the Word of God. They want to learn more about the Bible, but it becomes difficult to make it out to a Bible study. You may already have other commitments, even in church, serving other ministries, and you're not able to make it out an additional night of the week. And what we have sought to do with the Periscope Bible study, this Bible Basics, traveling right through the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, is give you an opportunity to learn more about the Bible from the comfort of your own home, from the comfort of your job, wherever you are in the world. you can be a part of this Bible study. One of the great things about this technology is not only are you able to watch it live, but we also are able to archive them not just on Periscope now. That's changed since the last time we were on, but we're also able to archive them on YouTube so that you can go right to my channel, J.A. Thomas 1988, and look up the Bible Basics playlist, and you will see all the lessons from Bible Basics beginning back in the book of Genesis right on up to where we stopped off at the end of the books of history. So it's a great opportunity, great experience for you to go and learn more about the Bible. If you've even studied the Bible in the past, I encourage you to go back and rewatch the broadcast, learn more about them, because every time you study God's word, every time you look at it, God will reveal something different. God is always showing us something new in his word. It doesn't matter how long you've been studying the Bible. It doesn't matter how long you've been a Christian. God always shows you something new, always breathes freshly on his word so that you can understand more and understand him in a new and deeper way, because God is always moving us deeper. God is always taking us to a new level in him. Learning never stops. No matter how many degrees you get, no matter how many times you've read through specific passages, or how many times you've heard different things preached in church, or you've gone through it, God is always revealing something new, and God always has something new in store for each and every one of us. So I'm truly blessed that we're able to use this medium, and I'm glad that this has been a blessing to each and every one of you. I encourage you, make sure you're following me so that whenever we go live, you get a notification right on your phone. Just follow, swipe to the right, click on my picture, and then go on and click follow me, so you're getting all updates whenever we go live. And you can follow me on all the social media outlets at Rev J Thomas. That's at Rev R-E-V J Thomas, Thomas, and you will stay connected to everything that's going on, not just in my life, but even life of New Psalmist Baptist Church. I post many things from stuff that's happening at New Psalmist. You can always follow at New Psalmist, and of course follow our pastor, Bishop Walter Scott Thomas Sr. at Bishop W.S. Thomas. Alrighty, so let's jump into the lesson. You know, Bible Basics, we're not here long. We're not going to be here all night. I know some of you got to get to watching some shows. There's this new show some of you may have heard called Greenleaf. You know, good drama, like Bishop always talks about. There's nothing like watching good drama on TV. So make sure you pay attention to all that's happening on the world and support. You know, Greenleaf comes on a black-owned station, Oprah Winfrey-owned network. So support our own, you know, give them some viewers. You know, you've never heard of it, I encourage you to go on demand, watch it, check out what's out, and always, you know, see what's happening so you know when we talk about the good drama that's on TV. All right, so Bible Basics. Today we kick off our study through the books of wisdom and poetry. Let's break it down for those of you who may not have been with us before. Let's kind of lay it out. The Bible is broken down, and we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. But within the Old and the New Testament, we have subcategories that help us to frame our understanding of Scripture. In the Old Testament, we start off with the books of law. Then we go to the books of history. Then the books of wisdom and poetry, the books of the major prophets, the minor prophets, the books of law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the books of history, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The books of wisdom, where we're going to pick up today, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Songs, Song of Solomon, depending on your version. And that's where we are today. So we finished off, we've looked at the trajectory of the chosen people of God from the beginning, the formation of first the world, the creation story in the beginning of Genesis. We've seen the creation of man, Adam and Eve. We've seen the creation of the covenant with Abram, later known as Abraham in Genesis. And we've traveled through, we've gone into captivity in Egypt. We've come into the promised land. We've seen God bless in the promised land, raise up a king by the name of David. And we've seen his King God having favor on David and David's lineage. But then we've also seen how the kings have turned their heart from God, which led to destruction, first of the northern kingdoms in 722, then of the southern kingdoms in 587. And then we finished off in the exile. And we see that through exile, God continued to have favor on his chosen people, as he promised that someone from David's lineage would always be on the throne. And we've seen the return back into the promised land. And that's where we left off in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, rebuilding of the land that God gave them. The books of history in the Old Testament give us a narrative. So in case you didn't know, the books of history track from the entrance into the promised land through exile, then the return to the promised land. So that is really the body of the Old Testament, and that's what gives us what is called the history that frames the narrative for God's chosen people. And we don't have in the Old Testament, we don't get another new account for the narrative of God's people after the book of Nehemiah. The prophets and the books of wisdom and poetry are things that are given to us that are oftentimes written during periods that we studied in the books of history. The prophets, as you'll remember, we talked about many of the prophets that were raised up during specific times of study as we went through the books of history. We'll touch on those in the next module, module 4, when we get to that in probably a couple of months, and really in a couple of weeks rather, because we're going to go through the books of wisdom and poetry pretty fast. But we see them writing and them sharing their visions, sharing the word of the Lord during specific times that we already studied about in the books of history. So we don't get a specific historical narrative anymore from this point on in the Old Testament. And then when we get to the New Testament, we pick up when we look at the life of Jesus, seeing some history, what's going on and what has happened in the time that from when we end the books of history into the New Testament. So just want to make sure that you're clear that as we take a different turn, as we look at the rest of the Old Testament, the books of wisdom and poetry, the books of the major prophets, the books of the minor prophets, a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of things that were happening, dealing with themes that we went over in the books of history and even some in the books of law, but we're not going to be looking necessarily at new time periods. So it's going to change. Our study is going to be a little different now because we're not looking at it from a narrative perspective, but I just want to make sure you have that foundation so you know what's happening. So today we're going to look at the book of Job, the first book in the section, the categories of the books of wisdom and poetry. And the book of Job is a very interesting book. This is the first time as we've gone linearly through that we start to see a different approach, a different account for us to learn about God. Because each and every book of the Bible seeks to give us some type of understanding of who God is, how he interacts with his people, and what his promises are for his people. So everything you read in the Bible seeks to do one of those three things: give you understanding of who God is, show you how God interacts with his people, and show you what God's feelings are towards his people. God's love, God's redeeming love, we see perfectly personified in the person of Jesus Christ. So now as we look at the book of Job, we're getting a new understanding of who God is and how God interacts with his people, and even what his people believe and think about him, and how that gets challenged throughout these 42 chapters in the book of Job. So many of you know about Job. It focuses on the life of a man named Job. Some of you have probably seen it written and said, who's Job? Well, it's Job. So, if you ever hear somebody say, turn to the book of Job, you know that they just don't know what they're talking about. Like if you hear them saying 2 Corinthians. Okay, no, I'm not going there. But no, if you hear them say the book of Job, just correct them and say the book of Job. So when you're reading through it, don't say Job. Don't say, I want to make sure you guys understand that. Make sure you say Job, 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 the book of Job. It is centered on his life and his journey and how an interaction that's set up changes the trajectory of his life and also brings to him to a new place of understanding who God is in his life. It begins, we hear about Job, but then we see for the first time an interaction between God. It says the angels have gathered, and there's an interaction in the heavenly realms, God and his angels, and there's also there Satan. Now this is where we're going to dig a little deeper today. In the first chapter, Job 1, around verse 6, we see the text records that Satan, I'm actually going to read this to you because I want to make sure you guys are hearing it, because this is Bible study, and in Bible study we go a little deeper than just the surface level. So I want to make sure I frame something for you guys that's really, we're going to build upon it, expand upon it, really when we get a little later down the line, but I want to sow this seed so you guys have it. So this is Job chapter 1, verse 6. On the day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came along with them, the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord, "From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." So let's unpack that for a little bit, because that really is the framework for the entire book of Job. That sets up what is getting ready to happen through the book. So let's first unpack it. This is the first time we've seen this type of interaction with God and his angels in a heavenly council, as what some scholars will really describe this as. And heavenly council has come together. And in this council, we have God, we have his angels, but we also have what's referred to as Satan. Now, this is a critical distinction I want to drop on you guys as we're studying the Bible. The Satan that's referred to in this text is not necessarily on the surface the same spiritual being we see expounded upon and we learn more about when we get to the New Testament, known as the devil, the spiritual being, the one who tempts the saints and leads them away from God. This is referred to in this passage, the Hebrew understanding here, as the Satan, which is also seen as someone who has some of the same characteristics that we find of the spiritual being in the devil in the New Testament, as being the adversary or the accuser. But is not given to us as the pronoun known as the devil, as Satan, that we see in the New Testament. So it's a critical distinction. Oftentimes we look at it and just say, oh, that's the devil, and we extrapolate a New Testament understanding on this Old Testament passage. But it's critical that we understand that distinction right there. And when we're studying the book, we'll get a little deep into that. And some of you who have taken some further studies can understand how this starts to fit into some of the questions that have come about in the composition of this. But I want to make sure you guys are understanding that this is referring to this spirit, the person, the Satan in this council, who brings questions, who causes there to be doubt. We're not sure if this is perhaps someone who is a member of the council, whose job is there to do such. We're not sure if this is indeed that spiritual being, but the text in the Hebrew has put a HA in front of it, which signifies that it's not necessarily a pronoun descriptive of what we see in the New Testament, but rather this is describing the person, the member of that council at the time that's saying these things, causing them to tempt. So we will make sure we got that clear distinction there. We'll learn more about it when we deal in the New Testament. We get more into the detail of the devil and the role of Satan and the spiritual being that Satan is. We'll deal with more with that later. But I want to make sure I gave you that, just drop that on you, so nobody's getting confused saying, where does this come from? This is the first time we've seen this theology. We see this same usage in the book of Zechariah in the 3rd chapter. We also see it in the 21st chapter of the book of 1 Chronicles, where it's used in this same manner. But these are the only times in the Old Testament and the really entire Bible we see it used in this specific manner. So just want to make sure that was clear. The Satan's job in this council is to bring contrary to be the adversary, to be the accuser. So we see some of the same characteristics that we use to understand and describe the devil, the spiritual being. I'll continue to use that because I want to make sure you guys are seeing the distinction. The spiritual being known as the devil that we see in 1 Peter chapter 5, that is looking around to sift the saints, to find someone to tempt and destroy. So make sure that you guys are seeing that. You'll hear a lot of, in just the teaching, some of that theology come out, because I want to make sure you guys are having a firm foundation upon which you can build your understanding of the scriptures. So the Satan's job here is to cause there to be question. And the text tells that he's been going about searching for someone, seeing what's happening in the earth. And God brings up Job. Critical distinction here. Oftentimes, people will read this and just say, oh, the devil said I'm going to go after Job, but I can't hit him. God says, I want to read that to you again, because that's critical in understanding. The Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered, from roaming through the earth and going back forth and in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? So the first critical distinction we see here is that God is the one who brings Job into the situation. God is the one who brings up Job as a candidate to be attacked and to be hit with the things that are going to come upon his life, to be the one who the devil is able to tempt, the devil is able to try to turn him away from God. So the first theological thing we learn from this is that God oftentimes will volunteer us to go through situations. God will bring us as the one saying, okay, it's time for you to have to go out and face the adversary, have to go through tough times, and to see if you can make it through it. So that's the first theological thing we understand here. And God says, all right, you can do anything to him, you just can't kill him. So Job is hit with trial after trial, loses his family, he loses his possessions, he loses his health, and he is now in a test of faith. This is what I call the test of his faith. Job now has been a righteous man. Text tells us he's been a righteous man. He has not done wrong. And he is in the biggest test of his faith, because even in not doing wrong, bad things have still come upon him. And it's critical that we understand, especially in our Christian journey, especially in our faith walk, that because we do good does not mean that we won't have to deal with bad situations. I want to say that again. Make sure you get that. Because we do good, it does not mean we will not have to go through bad situations. So that's one thing that is critical to understand. And that is really built upon something that's known as the retribution theology. You remember, as we read through the books, right, really all the way up in the Bible to this point, we've seen in practice what was known as the theology of retribution. The Deuteronomic historian is really big on this. Every time we see things happening, it's always set up as the people did bad, the people did evil in the eyes of God, and directly because of that, bad situations happened to them. They were conquered by foreign enemies. They were put into exile. They were put into captivity. We've seen this cycle over and over and over again. This is known as the retribution theology. The theology that meant, theology is your understanding of God. It meant that God punishes you when you do bad, and when you do good, God lets you experience prosperity, and God lets you experience peace. We see it when the kings, each king, when he came to power, if he turned his heart away from God, bad things happen. If he turns his heart to God and submitted to God, good things happen. So that's something that we've seen constantly over and over and over as we've gone through the books of the Deuteronomic historian, and even throughout the books of law and throughout the books of history. All of them, we've seen that theme over and over and over again. So yes, even when they built poles and built other gods and did things and that God told them not to do, there was a price they paid for that. That was the working out of their understanding of their relationship with God, which is understood, which we define as the retribution theology. You sin, you get punishment. You do good, God takes care of you. Simple thing. That is the prevailing theology at the time that the book of Job has been written. So understanding that, that's why it builds up that Job was good. Job was righteous. Job did things the way he was supposed to. He was blameless before God. And now, being blameless before God did not stop him from going through trials, and did not stop bad things from happening to him. So that's the first setup. But within the book of Job, we also see that there are some of what we call Job's friends that come to the picture. Eliphaz, his first friend, he believes that no one is ever completely sinless. He really believes that. You'll see it as you read through the book of Job. That is his understanding, that no man is completely sinless, that anyone and everyone has sinned. And if you haven't sinned, then you would not die. You would not be punished. You would not have to go through things. But if you have sinned, you would. And hence his point is that everybody who was born to that point had died. So he figured, hey, everybody has done some sin, and that's the problem, and that's why they have died. But he also believed that Job's sin must not be that bad, and so his suffering would not be long. So you see the understanding and the practice of the retribution theology. Because remember, everybody understands and practices out theology in their own way. He believed that everybody has sinned, but because Job's sins weren't too bad, then his suffering wasn't going to be too long. But now we see the next sin, Bildad, the next friend, Bildad, he believes that Job's children are the ones who sin. And because of that, they were deserving of their fate, to be killed, to be wiped off, to be in a tragic accident, and to be gone. He believed that they did evil, sin to such a manner that the way they died was a direct result of the things that they had done. So God punished them directly in magnitude to what they had done wrong in their lives, to the sins that they had committed. He believed that the way God treats us is dependent on our actions to him. So you're starting to see how this theology leaves things very one-sided. that God treats us solely in response to the way we treat him. And since Job is still alive, he believed that Job must not have done that much bad because he's still alive. His children had to have done bad because they did. But Job was still alive, so he said, okay, well, Job, you must not have done as much bad as your children did. It's interesting. You're starting to see the contradiction where this theology, the retribution theology, but we're also starting to see how this doesn't match up with who we believe God is and who we see God is. Because the key thing to remember as we go through this study today, and I'll pause right here to drop it, is that the retribution theology leaves out something that's so critical. Something so critical. And because we have the New Testament, we see it personified. It leaves out God's love. It states that God only deals with us in the way in response to how we deal with him. So you start to see the cracks in this. That's why, and that's the purpose of the book of Job. Because if Job was righteous, he wouldn't have to deal with this. But God is showing, no, I've got to change your understanding and I've got to give you a different situation. I'm going to give you the book of Job to give you a different glimpse. Remember how I framed it, of who I am. God says, I'm not just all hellfire and brimstone, but I love you. And because of my love, what you do is not always return exactly to you. Because the reality is, if God punished us for everything we did wrong in direct magnitude for what we did, none of us would still be here. So God gives us the book of Job in this specific place in its position in the Old Testament, following the books of history to say, okay, I've got to reveal a new side of me to you. You've seen me one way, but let me give you another book, the book of Job, another story so you can see it. So you understand now that I'm not just a retributionist, but there's also another side of me that's just as important, if not more important than that side. Because the reality is God is showing us now his mercy, that he does not punish us for everything we've done wrong the way we should be punished. So, third friend, Zophar, he believes that Job has some sin in him that's causing his suffering, even if Job won't admit it. He believes that Job is trying to act like he's done right. Job's trying to act like he ain't never done wrong. But he's like, no, you got something that you did wrong. You just ain't admitting it yet. And because of it, you going through. So he's saying you ain't got to admit it to us. It's evident because you going through something right now. Even to pause right here, many of us have friends who talk like this, who really believe that the stuff that happens in all of our lives is a direct correlation to something we've done. It means that there's a sin. We see it in biblical terms, that there's a sin of the father, sin of the grandfather, sin of the child. There's a curse somewhere that is causing pain over and over and over and over again in our lives. And that's why we are going through what we are going through. One last person that we find in the book of Job that has something to say, that gets into Job's business, that's in the situation, is Elihu. He's the last to speak. He's not really connected to the other three. Really, in the narrative, he essentially comes out of nowhere. He just appears, and he's there, and he's got a lot to say. He believes a little differently. He believes that God uses discipline to turn people to him. So he disciplines people. He puts them through difficult situations. He makes them pay for the things that they've done wrong. And God uses that to speak to them, and uses that to, quote unquote, teach them a lesson and to get them back to him, to get them in the right place where he wants them to do. He says, when hit with the pain and suffering, to paraphrase, when hit with pain and suffering, God requests that humans listen to him and follow his orders. That's why you got to be careful with the people around you when you're going through stuff. I just dropped that. I'm not preaching. This is Bible study. But you got to be careful with the people around you, because sometimes they will say stuff that's so off the wall, so whacked out, that they will have you believing that God doesn't love you, that God's doing it to make you suffer, to make you go through. That just ain't what it is. All right. Now back off my pulpit, back to my lectern, back to Bible study. So these are what we see from the four people who have something to say. And they really believe that there's what I coin as a top-down approach, where whatever we do, God then pours onto us for our actions. So it happens to us. There's no communication. There's not a two-way street. We don't have access into it. Is if we've done wrong, then wrong's just going to happen to us. Nothing you can do about it. We see a huge problem in that because it leaves no room for God's redeeming love. So now we have the final interaction, and that's the interaction between Job and God. It's interesting. Job never curses God. He never gets to that point where he throws in the towel on God and says, all right, later with you, God. But Job does get to the point where he demands and asks God and challenges God, essentially, to tell him why this happens. So we see a lot of dynamics at play here. First dynamic we see is the understanding that bad things happen to good people. That's the first dynamic we see, that our actions, good or bad, do not have a direct correlation onto what God allows to happen to us. So no matter how good you are, bad things can still find you. And so that's something that God is teaching us, and we see it through Job. Second thing we see through Job, and we see worked out in the erroneous theology of his friends and comforters, as is often coined in religious circles, is that it's not necessarily just a one-way street. It's not retribution where whatever you sow, you're going to get it right back from God. It don't work like that. So that's the second thing. But then the third thing we see is that Job challenges God, and he demands that God give him an answer for why he's going through this. But God's response is interesting. He does not respond. He doesn't give him all the answers, but he puts Job in his place. He said, Job, I'm God. I don't have to explain myself to you. I don't have to give you the understanding and tell you why stuff is happening, because I'm God. I made the heavens and the earth. I formed everything. You ain't have a part in none of that. Job realizes that he done kind of gotten a little big on himself. He say, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I don't know. I can't understand your knowledge. I don't understand. I can't get where you at. The interesting thing about that's the third piece we learn, is that God's ways are not our ways, and it's not for us to understand. This is something that a lot of us struggle with, because the reason that God does stuff is not for us to comprehend. The reality is, the reason that God has done things in our lives, we will never comprehend until the day we meet him in heaven. And it's not for us to understand, because this is the other side of it. We don't have the capacity to understand why God does things the way he does. It's our responsibility, as Job has, to trust God in it all. It's not our responsibility to understand it. It's our responsibility to remain holding to God's hand and trusting him in all of it. God has this conversation with Job in what's called a telephony. He appears to him in a storm, and he has this conversation. He tells Job, it ain't for you to understand. It ain't for you to be getting it. You don't have the right to question me. You don't have the right to demand that I give you understanding, because I'm God, and you're not even on my level, essentially. He said, Job, you ain't on my level. So you ain't got the right to be coming to me and demanding that I tell you why I done things the way I did them. Job understands that. He gets back in his place. And the end of the book is interesting. And I want to deal with the last 5 minutes or so of our class today. I really want to dig into this, because at the end of the story, after God has put Job back in his place, Job is understanding that it's not for him to understand. The text records in the last chapter that God then restores to Job not just a new family, not just new possessions, but he gives him more than he had before. And this is where I really want to dig in right here, because oftentimes we see this, we have to look at it, we have the benefit of working from a New Testament understanding, having the completion of the canon, all 66 books, and understanding God in a more complete manner, because we're not locked in just to the revelation he had given at this time. So we see the end of the story where God has restored to him. But a lot of times we take that out of context, and we believe that if God sends you through bad things, he's going to give you better on the end and you're in this life. And a lot of times we've often mistaken what God is doing in our lives, and just sat around saying, well, I'm believing God, I'm going through hell right now, but God's going to give me better. And that has created, it's almost what we see now in the prosperity understanding of the gospel, but taken to the wrong context. Because remember, at this time, they do not have the full understanding of what heaven is. The end of days, quote unquote, to this point in biblical theology, everyone went to the same place, Sheol. You'll read it. We've seen some of it. That at the end of life, afterlife, that was it. It was over. There was no heaven and hell understanding. We get that worked out completely in the New Testament. So everybody goes to the same place. But what we now can learn and project onto this story from our New Testament understanding is that oftentimes the reward does not just come in this life, but sometimes the reward comes in heaven. For heaven is paradise. It is the place where there's fullness of everything, where we're in perfect relationship with God the Father, and with Jesus the Son is there, and we can praise forever. And God gives us there the fulfillment of everything. And the end of this book of Job, we can also see the understanding and take it in from our New Testament understanding that this might not necessarily just be here on earth receiving fullness and double portion and everything, but also in heaven. So that our reward may not be here, but the reward may be there. So it's a critical understanding, a critical distinction that we must put into proper context, that we don't exactly, our hope is in glory. We know that the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared to the glory that we shall receive when we get to heaven to meet Jesus in face to face. So that is where some of our reward comes. So if the reward is not just here, but it's there, why am I working it out this way? Because it gives us a fuller picture and allows us to be in the proper context. Because when you are constantly looking for material possessions, when you're constantly looking for an earthly reward, when that does not come on the timeline you think it should come, that can put you in a wrong understanding of what God has for you. Let me say that again. When you don't have a complete understanding that God's reward for you may not just be here on earth, but it may be in heaven, you will oftentimes wait for it. So everything you're going through, you're saying, well, God's going to give me X. God's going to give me Y. God's going to give me Z. When that's not the promise God has for you. The promise God has for you is something that you cannot access until you close your eyes on this side and open them up on that side. And it's critical that as we work through the Bible, we don't take stories out of context and work and look and project onto them the things we want. We don't project onto Job, the end of Job, and saying, oh, well, I'm believing that God's going to give me double for my trouble, and use that out of context. Yes, God does give us rewards. Yes, God does pour out open up the windows of heaven and pour blessings upon us. But God also has rewards stored up for us when we get to see him. So it's important that we understand that just because the end of Job is written in such a way where it shows us that Job got a double portion of everything, he was richer than, he had more money than he had ever had before, more possessions, he had a better family, he had everything. That does not necessarily mean that God's just going to give us all this stuff in this life. But the reality is anything we get in this life is going to pass away. But what we get there is eternal. So our hope is not just for material possessions. Our hope is for the living that life in heaven when God gives us everything, where we don't even have any needs, because God, who is all sufficient, we access fully the all-sufficiency of God because we are in perfect communion with him. We are in right relationship. We are right there at his throne. So everything he has becomes we have the ability to access it because we are there with him. So I wanted to make sure I got that distinction out so that you don't read through Job and say, oh, well, if Job got it, I'm believing that that's the theological understanding that I now have. But we must project into that our New Testament understanding that our reward is not just here, but our reward is when we get there. So just wanted to make sure I worked that out for you guys. And that's, the book of Job in a nutshell. 40 minutes of Job. We'll work through it. I'm glad I got this opportunity. I'm excited about being back on Periscope with you guys, able to share the message of faith, because I truly believe that God has so much in store for each and every one of us, and we access it more and more day by day as we study his word. So if you're blessed by the lesson today, just send up the heart, send me a comment right at the bottom, send in the emoji with the hand up, the praying hands, the clapping hands. Any emoji you want to send, just send that up. I want to make sure that you guys were blessed today. The studies I went through and prepared for this lesson, it blessed me. And it's my prayer that you were blessed today. As always, all this will be up on Periscope. I'm going to load it on the YouTube channel. So all of them are there. All of them will be right there. Yes, first time listening, where I'm telling the book that I can actually say, I understand. Amen. Glad you guys are on. Some of you first time viewers, I'm glad you guys are with us. Hope you'll stay with us. We'll be back next Wednesday, same time, same station. Now we'll be moving to the book of Psalms. We're going to do a couple lessons through Psalms. I'm still working out how many we're going to do because you know it's 150 Psalms. You can be in Psalms forever. I want to make sure we continue to move through, but I also want to make sure we get to dig and unpack some of it so you're understanding the composition. For those of you who this is your first time watching, just kind of a refresher, the aim of this Bible study is to give you a beginner's understanding to the Bible, how it's composed, how it's put together, where each book fits, why things are done the way they are in the book. So that when we go deeper into Bible Basics 201, 301, 401, we can dig from a firm foundation. We had a conversation in our staff meeting yesterday talking about how we can prepare to build spiritual growth opportunities. And we realize, and we've seen it over and over, that before you can really grow deep in the faith, you have to have a working understanding of God's word. It's hard to dig deep in the faith when you don't know what God has said to you and to his people, because the Bible was given to us for us to see and understand a glimpse of who God is. God is still speaking to us each and every day, but he has given us his word to have a context for who he is, to understand the formation and the beginning of the journey of his people, and understand without above everything else the track record of God's redeeming love. So that's the purpose of this class, Bible Basics, now in Module 3, to give you a working understanding of the Bible so that you can stand on that foundation and you can grow and go step by step each and every day. Once again, the YouTube channel is J.A. Thomas 1988, J. Thomas 1988. All of the Bible Basics classes are there. It's a playlist, even on YouTube. If you just search Bible Basics Joshua Thomas, the playlist will come right up and you'll see all of the lessons starting back in the book of Genesis. But I hope you've been blessed today. As always, continue to share this on Twitter, on Facebook. Send a screenshot, post it on Instagram, use hashtag Bible Basics. Let everybody know that if they're looking to understand more about God's word, if they're looking to grow deeper and to become the person that God has created them to be, then they need to be a part of this Bible Basics Bible study. So I love you guys. See you next week. Of course, this Sunday, join us at New Psalmist for worship, 7:15, 9:30, 12 o'clock. Bishop will be preaching, continuing the sermon series entitled Interviews with Jesus. It's going to be a blessing. Hope to see you there. If you're not in Baltimore, you can join us on newpsalmist.org. You can be a part of our virtual online congregation. Now, until next week, stay blessed. I'll check with y'all later.